Hello everyone, and welcome back to Terrifying Bedtime Tales. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Again, starting here, the continued parts. Name was cleared, but the damage had been done. Rebuilding my reputation and restoring relationships took time and effort. I had to navigate a complex web of personal and professional consequences, and the scars of the experience lingered long after the immediate crisis had passed. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of safeguarding one's personal integrity. I emerged from the ordeal with a renewed sense of vigilance and a deeper understanding of the fragility of human relationships. While the shadows of the past continued to haunt me, I remained committed to moving forward with strength and resolve, determined not to let the darkness of that chapter define my future story. Music 58. After the unsettling events of the past few months, identity theft, cryptic messages, and the haunting grave, I decided that I needed a drastic change of scenery. My therapist suggested a retreat to a remote location to clear my head, so I found a secluded cabin in the mountains, far from the clamor of city life. The promise of isolation seemed like the perfect remedy for the chaos that had engulfed my world. The cabin was nestled deep in the forest, accessible only via a narrow winding road that disappeared into a sea of trees. The area was picturesque, with the crisp mountain air and the serene silence broken only by the occasional chirping of birds. It was exactly what I needed, a place where I could escape from the stress and start to piece my life back together. When I arrived, the cabin appeared to be a quaint, well-kept retreat. Its exterior was charming, with wooden siding and a cozy porch that overlooked a serene lake. I let myself in with a key I'd received from the rental agency and took a deep breath, feeling a fleeting sense of relief. The interior was rustic but comfortable, furnished with old but well-maintained furniture. I set my bags down and began to settle in. For the first few days, everything was calm and uneventful. I spent my time hiking through the surrounding woods, enjoying the peaceful solitude. The simplicity of life in the cabin was a welcome change, and I felt a tentative sense of peace returning to my life. It was on the fourth day, while cleaning the cabin and organizing the closets, that I stumbled upon something troubling. In the back of a closet behind a stack of old blankets, I found a small dusty box. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I discovered an assortment of items: a worn journal, a collection of photographs, and several pieces of clothing that looked strangely out of place. The journal was old, its leather cover cracked and faded. I thumbed through the pages, reading snippets of the entries. The writing was erratic and disjointed, detailing a life of paranoia and fear. The previous occupants seemed to have been obsessed with the idea of being watched and followed. The entry spoke of strange noises in the night, mysterious figures in the woods, and a growing sense of dread. One entry in particular stood out there, watching me. I know they are the shadows in the forest, the whispers in the dark. I can't escape them. They want something from me, but I don't know what. The photographs were equally unsettling. They depicted various angles of the cabin, but with disturbing details. In some, shadowy figures were faintly visible in the background. Others showed scenes of the woods around on the cabin, with strange markings and symbols etched into trees. My heart pounded as I realized that the previous occupant had been deeply troubled, perhaps even driven to madness by whatever they believed was haunting them. I moved on to the clothing, which consisted of a few jackets and worn boots. One of the jackets had a small blood-stained tear near the sleeve. My mind raced with questions: who had stayed here before me, and what had driven them to leave such evidence of fear and paranoia? The sense of unease grew stronger as I continued my search. In the basement, I found another disturbing clue behind a loose panel in the wall. There was a hidden compartment containing a collection of items that seemed out of place for a casual visitor. A a set of lockpicking tools, a map of the surrounding area with various locations marked, and a collection of handwritten notes, the detailed surveillance of the cabin and its surroundings. The notes were filled with descriptions of people who had visited the cabin, detailed observations of their habits, and even some crude sketches of faces. The final note was the most chilling. I've seen them, they're coming for me, they're everywhere. As I examined the notes, I felt a growing sense of paranoia creeping over me. The idea that someone might have been watching me while I was staying in the cabin was almost too much to bear. I couldn't help but wonder if the previous occupant had been right. Had they been pursued by someone, or was their fear a product of their own deteriorating mental state? That night, the silence of the cabin felt more oppressive than ever. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified in the darkness. I lay in bed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin, once a refuge, had become a trap. The following morning, I decided to contact the rental agency to inform them of my findings. I wanted to know more about the previous occupant and whether anyone else had experienced similar issues. However, the rental agent I spoke with was evasive and seemed uncomfortable with the questions. They assured me that they would look into it, but didn't offer any further details. Determined to uncover more, I continued my own investigation. I reached out to local authorities, but they were unable to provide much help, as there was no record of any unusual activity associated with the cabin. The only information they could offer was that the cabin had been rented out several times over the years, but no complaints had been filed. My growing sense of paranoia began to take a toll on my mental state. The fear that had once driven me to seek refuge in the cabin now seemed to have followed me there. I became hypervigilant, constantly scanning the surroundings and jumping at every sound. Eventually, I made the decision to leave the cabin early. The sense of danger and the eerie evidence of the previous occupants' disturbed state had become too much for me to handle. As I packed my belongings, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving behind something more sinister than I had initially realized. Driving away from the cabin, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The forest and the cabin receded into the distance, but the unsettling memories and the lingering sense of dread remained. The remote getaway had promised peace, but had instead offered a glimpse into a chilling reality I was desperate to leave behind. As I returned to this city, I hoped that the unsettling chapter of the cabin would fade into memory, but deep down I knew that the experience had changed me. The fear that once seemed confined to the cabin now seemed to shadow my every step, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the depths of human paranoia. Story music 59. It began with a fleeting sensation, a vague recollection of an event I was certain I hadn't experienced. At first, I brushed it off as a lapse in memory, a trick of the mind. But as weeks passed, these strange memories grew more frequent and vivid. They were snippets of experiences that felt real, but never actually occurred. I could recall conversations, places, and interactions with people I didn't know, and none of these supposed events matched anything from my actual life. The first incident happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in my living room flipping through an old photo album when I suddenly remembered attending a wedding in a quaint, picturesque chapel. The memory was so clear: the scent of fresh flowers, the sound of a string quartet, the laughter of unfamiliar faces, that I could almost feel it. I was certain I had never been to such a wedding, yet the memory seemed almost tangible. I tried to dismiss it as an elaborate daydream, but the pattern continued. I'd have conversations with colleagues where I'd recall details that seemed oddly specific and out of place. I'd remember attending social gatherings with people I didn't recognize. I even began to question the authenticity of my own memories. Was I slipping into some sort of mental disarray? The turning point came one evening when I sat down to read a novel I had recently purchased. As I flipped through the pages, a passage described an event that struck me as eerie. Familiar, it was a story about a dinner party at a restaurant with a specific set of people and details that matched. One of the memories I'd been experiencing, I had no recollection of attending such a dinner party, but the memory was so vivid that it felt like I had been there. The growing confusion drove me to investigate further. I started keeping a journal of these memories meticulously, noting down every detail and sensation. I reviewed old photographs, social media posts, and any documentation that could shed light on these events. I even reached out to friends and family asking if they remembered any of these incidents or if they had heard me mention them. Everyone insisted that the events I described were unfamiliar to them. Desperate for answers, I turned to a cognitive psychologist who specialized in memory disorders. I explained my situation, and after reviewing my case, the psychologist conducted a series of tests and interviews. They found nothing that could account for the false memories. My cognitive functions were normal, and there was no sign of mental illness or neurological issues. The psychologist suggested that these experiences could be a form of false memory implantation, or external influences could be creating these vivid but incorrect memories. The idea seemed outlandish, but it was the only explanation that fit. I had read about psychological experiments involving false memory implantation, but I never thought it could happen to me. My suspicions were further aroused when I began noticing subtle patterns in the memories. They seemed to be connected to a specific time frame in places I had recently visited. For example, memories of charity gala I had never attended described with such detail that it was as if I had been there, coincided with my visits to local community events. The more I dug, the more unsettling things became. I started to investigate the people and places mentioned in my memories. I discovered that several of them had connections to a shadowy organization known for its psychological research and experimentation. There were reports of individual UAL involved in unethical practices, including manipulating memories for various purposes. The connection was tenuous, but troubling enough to make me cautious. As I pursued this line of inquiry, I noticed that my investigation was being monitored. Strange occurrences began to happen. My emails were tampered with. I received cryptic messages, and I felt a constant sense of being followed. It was as though someone was aware of my search for answers and was actively trying to obstruct it. One evening, while sifting through old files, I stumbled upon a document that made my blood run cold. It was a detailed report about a psychological experiment involving memory manipulation. The names and details matched individuals I had encountered during my research. The report described techniques for implanting false memories and even included case studies of subjects who had experienced IED similar phenomena to mine. The realization was horrifying. Someone had been deliberately manipulating my memories, injecting false experiences into my mind. But the purpose behind this manipulation remained elusive. Was it an experiment, a form of psychological torture, or was there another, more sinister motive? Determined to confront the perpetrators, I took all my findings to the authorities. The investigation that followed was fraught with challenges. The organization involved was deeply entrenched and elusive, making it difficult for law enforcement to take concrete action. Despite their efforts, the trail went cold, and the people responsible for my ordeal remained at large. In the midst of this turmoil, I struggled with the impact of the false memories on my daily life. The inability to trust my own recollections was disorienting. Every interaction, every experience seemed tainted by doubt. I had to learn to navigate my life with a new understanding that not everything I remembered was real. As time went on, I found solace in therapy and support from loved ones. I focused on rebuilding my sense of self and learning to differentiate between genuine memories and the false ones that had been implanted. It was a difficult, journey, but with perseverance, I began to reclaim control over my own The experience had left an indelible mark, but it also taught me the importance of resilience and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most insidious manipulations. I continued to advocate for awareness about psychological manipulation and false memory implantation, hoping to prevent others from suffering as I had. The ordeal had been a dark chapter in my life, but it was one that ultimately led me to a greater understanding of both the fragility and strength of the human mind. Story 60. It started with a single note slipped under my door. It was an innocuous-looking piece of paper folded neatly and bearing no signature. I picked it up curious and unfolded it. The note was written a neat, precise handwriting and read, "Don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning today. I know you have a meeting at 2 p.m. At first I thought it was some sort of joke or a misplaced reminder from a friend. The note mentioned my dry cleaning in my schedule with eerie accuracy, but it didn't seem threatening. I shrugged it off and went about my day, assuming it was a harmless prank or a mistake. However, when a second note appeared a few days later detailing my gym schedule and commenting on my choice of workout clothes, I started to feel uneasy. The notes were always unsigned, but they seemed to know too much about my life. The handwriting was consistent and the observations were accurate. I considered changing my routine, but the notes were so specific that it was impossible to ignore them without altering my daily habits drastically. As days went by, the notes became more frequent and detailed. They started mentioning personal conversations I'd had with friends, comments about my family, and even specifics about a recent argument I'd had with a coworker. Each note was polite, but carried an unsettling familiarity that made my skin crawl. One evening, after finding another note, this one detailing my grocery shopping and expressing a seemingly innocent opinion on my choice of vegetables, I decided I could no longer ignore the situation. I went to the police station to report the notes. Detective Davis, a seasoned officer with a calm demeanor, took my case seriously, but seemed skeptical. "Do you have any idea who might be sending these notes?" he asked, looking over the examples I had brought with me. "I don't know," I replied, feeling a mix of frustration and anxiety. "I don't have any enemies or anyone I can think of who would do something like this." Detective Davis took a detailed report and assured me that they would investigate. He advised me to keep the notes and any related information in a safe place and to document any further incidents. I left the station feeling a slight sense of relief, but the fear lingered. The following week, the notes escalated into something much more disturbing. The tone shifted from seemingly benign observations to over threats. One note read, "I know you didn't stop by the grocery store last night. You should be more careful about your habits if you don't want things to get worse." Another note appeared after I had attended a social event, describing the people I had interacted with and subtly suggesting that someone might be watching me. It ended with a chilling line, "Your friends won't be there to protect you when the time comes. Be wary of who you trust." My anxiety grew with each new note. I began to feel like I was being watched constantly. Every time I left my apartment, I checked over my shoulder, and I started to question whether anyone I encountered was somehow connected to the notes. I was consumed by paranoia and fear. The police investigation, though ongoing, had yielded no tangible leads. They had interviewed neighbors and reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras, but there were no clear suspects. Detective Davis suggested that I increase my vigilance and consider changing my routine to throw off the scent. The more I tried to alter my daily patterns, the more the notes seemed to follow me. They began to comment on my new habits, almost as if the sender had anticipated my attempts to outsmart them. One particularly unsettling note read, "Changing your routine won't help. I know where you live, what you do, and who you see. You're not as clever as you think." The notes started arriving in increasingly public places, on my car windshield, in my mailbox, and even slipped into my work bag. Each time, they seemed to be getting closer to my most private spaces. The once manageable annoyance had now become a genuine threat to my safety. Desperate for answers, I turned to my friends and family, sharing the details of the situation and seeking their support. They were concerned and sympathetic, but felt helpless in the face of the situation. I began to feel isolated, unsure whom I could trust, and my daily life became a constant exercise and paranoia. One night, after receiving another threatening note that hinted at an upcoming confrontation, I decided to take more drastic measures. I hired a private security firm to monitor my apartment and provide additional protection. They installed security cameras around my building and provided a security detail to accompany me when I left my home. Despite these measures, the notes persisted, growing more menacing. With each new delivery, they began to include disturbing predictions about future events and attempts to manipulate my emotions. I felt trapped in a psychological game where the rules were ever shifting and the stakes were becoming more dire than. One evening, after receiving a particularly chilling note that included a photograph of me leaving my apartment building, I noticed something different. The photograph was taken from a distance, but the angle was one I recognized. It was from the security camera's vantage point. It dawned on me that the sender might have access to footage from my own security system. I immediately contacted the private security firm and informed them of the situation. They conducted a thorough review of the security footage and discovered that someone had been tampering with the system, accessing footage from the cameras. The realization that my security was compromised was a devastating blow. The investigation took on a new urgency. Detective Davis worked with the security firm to identify any potential suspects and trace the source of the security breach. The pressure was mounting, and I began to feel like I was living in a nightmare. In the midst of this turmoil, breakthrough finally came. The private security firm managed to trace the tampered footage back to a local individual who had been hired to handle security installations for several buildings in the area. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that this individual had a history of invasive behavior and had been using his position to track and harass clients. The discovery led to the arrest of the culprit and brought a semblance of relief. The notes ceased and the threat to my safety diminished, although the experience left me deeply shaken. I was grateful for the resolution and the return of a sense of normally. In the end, the ordeal taught me the importance of vigilance and the need for robust security measures. The notes had started as a mere nuisance, but had escalated into a terrifying invasion of privacy. The fear and anxiety I had experienced were profound, but what the perpetrator apprehended, I was finally able to reclaim my sense of safety and peace. Story 61. The partnership had seemed promising at first when I joined forces with Ryan Cole, a charismatic and well-connected entrepreneur. It felt like the perfect opportunity to expand my business. Ryan's reputation was impressive, his network was extensive, and his ideas seemed innovative. However, it wasn't long before I began to notice unsettling changes in his behavior. Initially, Ryan was energetic and forward-thinking, but as time passed, his enthusiasm turned into something more intense. He started pushing into risky ventures, investments, and deals that seemed overly ambitious and lacked due diligence. I was no stranger to high-stakes business, but Ryan's propositions fell off like they were too good to be true. One day, Ryan proposed a new venture that was particularly alarming. He suggested we invest heavily in a startup that on paper seemed promising, but lacked the stability and track record to justify the large sum he was recommending. I questioned the logic behind the proposal, but Ryan brushed off my concerns with a confident smile, saying sometimes you have to take risks to reap big rewards. Despite my reservations, I agreed to move forward, albeit cautiously. My instinct told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Ryan's increasing insistence on pushing me into these high-risk deals began to make me uncomfortable. I noticed that he was becoming increasingly secretive about his own investments, in financial dealings driven by a growing sense of unease. I decided to dig into Ryan's background. I started with a simple internet search, hoping to uncover any red flags that might explain his sudden shift in behavior. To my surprise, I found very little information about his prior to our partnership. There were no significant achievements or notable career milestones, just vague references to a few business ventures that had either failed or fizzled out without much fanfare. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I reached out to a private investigator. I provided them with all the information I had about Ryan, including his previous business activities and any connections he had. The investigator's findings were both alarming and revealing. Band's past was marked by a series of failed ventures and legal disputes, but more importantly, there was a pattern of behavior that suggested manipulative schemes designed to exploit others. In several cases, he had been involved in dubious financial practices, convincing business partners to invest in projects with little to no chance of success. It seemed that Ryan was adept at presenting himself as a savvy businessman while concealing his true motives. One incident stood out. Ryan had been involved in a venture where he convinced a group of investors to put money into a fake company. The company was nothing more than a shell, and the funds were siphoned off into hidden accounts. The victims had been left high and dry with no recourse for their losses. The details were chillingly similar to the situations Ryan was now pushing me into. Armed with this information, I confronted Ryan. I arranged a meeting at one of our usual restaurants, a place where we often discuss business. As we sat down, I felt a knot in my stomach. The conversation started normally enough, but I couldn't hold back any longer. Ryan, I've been looking into some of your past ventures. I began cautiously. There are a few things that don't add up. Can you explain why there are so many discrepancies? Brian's demeanor changed instantly. His confident facade cracked, revealing a hint of defensiveness. What are you talking about? My past is irrelevant. We're here to focus on our future. I pressed on, showing him the information I had uncovered. Ryan's face went pale as he read through the documents. His initial calmness was replaced by a mix of anger and fear. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising. This is all part of a bigger plan. You're not seeing the bigger picture. I was stunned. What plan? What are you talking about? Ryan's attempt to justify his actions became more frantic. He spoke of grand schemes and hidden opportunities, but his words were incoherent and filled with contradictions. It was clear that he was trying to manipulate the situation, but his efforts only confirmed my suspicions. Realizing that continuing this partnership would only lead to more danger, I decided to sever ties with Ryan. I informed him that I was withdrawing from our joint ventures and that I would be seeking legal advice to protect my interests. Ryan's reaction was one of desperate pleading, but I remained resolute. I knew that any further involvement with him could have serious repercussions. In the aftermath, I worked with my legal team to address any potential fallout from our business dealings. I made sure to alert the authorities about Ryan's past activities and to take steps to safeguard my investments. The process was lengthy and complex, but it was essential to protect myself from any remaining risks. As I moved forward, I took valuable lessons from the experience. I learned to be more cautious in evaluating business partners and to trust my in when something felt off. Ryan's manipulative schemes had endangered me, but they also served as a stark reminder of the importance of due diligence and transparency in business. The ordeal with Ryan was a harsh lesson in the darker side of entrepreneurship. It underscored the importance of vigilance and the need to thoroughly vet potential partners. While it took time to recover from the financial and emotional strain, I emerged from the experience more informed and resilient, with a renewed commitment to safeguarding my business and personal integrity. Story 62. The pattern began subtly. At first, a friend here, a colleague there, people I knew and cared about started disappearing one by one. Each disappearance was followed by a wave of confusion and concern that seemed to ripple through my social circle. At first I dismissed it as a series of unrelated events, but as the list of missing persons grew, an unsettling realization dawned on me. I was the only common link between them. It began with Mark, a colleague from work. One morning he didn't show up to the office, and his phone would stray to voicemail. By lunchtime his absence was marked by growing concern. Later that day, a report surfaced that Mark had vanished without a trace. There were no clues, no signs of struggle, just an empty apartment and unanswered questions. A week later, Emily, a close friend from my book club, disappeared. She had been at a meeting the previous evening, and the following morning she was nowhere to be found. Her apartment was undisturbed, her car parked outside, and her phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. Then came the worst blow. My cousin Alex, whom I had recently reconnected with after years apart. He had been staying at my house while he looked for a new place. One morning, I woke up to find him gone. His belongings were still there, but he was nowhere to be found. Each disappearance felt like a personal blow. I had always considered myself a relatively unremarkable person, but the increasing frequency of these incidents started to make me feel like a magnet for misfortune. I couldn't ignore the growing pattern. And everyone who was close to me was vanishing. Desperate for answers, I started piecing together the events leading up to each disappearance. What stood out was that in the days or weeks prior, each person had been in contact with me or had been involved in some way in my life. This pattern suggested that the connection between the disappearances wasn't just coincidental. Someone or something was targeting the people around me to reach me. I decided to investigate each disappearance further, starting with Mark. I visited his apartment, hoping to find something that could provide a clue. The place was eerily tidy, with no sign of disturbance. I spoke to his neighbors, who described his recent behavior as normal. No unusual visitors or suspicious activity had been reported. The next stop was Emily's apartment. The book club meeting she attended before her disappearance was a regular gathering with familiar faces. I reached out to the members, but no one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. The only clue I found was a cryptic message scrawled on a note that had been left on her desk. It read, "The clock is ticking." The most haunting investigation was into Alex's disappearances. Belongings were untouched, and his phone showed no signs of unusual activity. However, as I examined his personal effects, I found a small notebook with strange notes and sketches. The entries seemed to detail his observations of our interactions and included drawings of my house. The last entry was particularly chilling. There, getting closer, we're running out of time. Feeling the weight of the mounting evidence, I turned my attention to the possibility that someone close to me might be orchestrating these disappearances. The thought was disturbing, but it made sense given the pattern. I revisited my recent interactions with the people around me and began to suspect Rachel again. Her sudden and intense interest in my life, coupled with her evasiveness, made her a prime suspect. I decided to confront Rachel, but she was evasive and defensive. When I mentioned the disappearances, she claimed she had no knowledge of any wrongdoing and was visibly distressed by the suggestion. Her reaction seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. In an effort to protect myself and find the truth, I installed security cameras around my house and increased my vigilance. I also reached out to local law enforcement, presenting my findings and urging them to investigate the disappearances more thoroughly. They were cautious, but agreed to look into it further. Despite my efforts, the disappearances continued. It was as if whoever was behind this was always one step ahead. I felt increasingly isolated, and the sense of being watched became overwhelming. Every day was marked by the fear that someone was targeting those I cared about to reach me. One evening, after a particularly stressful day of investigation, I received an anonymous message. It was a photo of my home taken from a vantage point I recognized as the back alley. Company in the photo was a simple but chilling message: "You're next." The message solidified my fears. I was being watched, and the disappearances were a deliberate attempt to unsettle me. The realization that I was the ultimate target in this dangerous game made me feel vulnerable, and exposed. I took immediate action, intensifying my security measures and preparing myself for the worst. I knew I had to remain vigilant and continuing investigating even if it meant risking my own safety. I delved deeper into the network of people who had been around me, looking for any additional clues or connections that might reveal the identity of the person behind the disappearances. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the person targeting my loved ones was highly organized and skilled at evading detection. The challenge was not only to uncover their identity, but also to understand their motives and prevent any further harm. The trail was growing colder, and the sense of dread was unrelenting. Each day was a battle to stay one step ahead of the unknown threat. But amid the fear and uncertainty, one thing remained clear: I was determined to uncover the truth and protect myself and those I cared about from whatever sinister force was orchestrating these disappearances. Story 63. It started on a cool autumn evening, the kind where the leaves crunch underfoot and the air carries a hint of impending frost. I returned home from work, tired but ready for a quiet evening, only to find a small package on my doorstep. There was no return address, just my name written in neat, precise script. Curiosity piqued. I brought the package inside and carefully unwrapped it. Inside, I found an old photograph of my childhood home, one I hadn't seen in years. The photograph was taken from an angle that only someone intimately familiar with the house could capture. It was accompanied by a handwritten note that simply read, "I remember when you were happy here." The surprise left me unsettled, but I tried to brush it off as a prank or a mistake. That is until the next day, when another package arrived. This time it was a small, delicate locket, one that matched the description of a piece of jewelry I had lost months ago. Inside the locket was a picture of my grandmother, who had passed away years earlier. The sight of it made my skin crawl, and the accompanying note read, "I'm keeping watch." The pattern continued over the weeks. Each package was wrapped meticulously, containing items that were deeply personal and meaningful to me. There was the silver bracelet I'd lost on a trip years ago, a ticket stub from a concert I had attended, and even a diary from my teenage years filled with my angsty teenage thoughts and secrets. Each item was accompanied by a note, each one more chilling than the last. One package contained a stuffed animal that I had had since childhood, a bear I'd long since misplaced. The note read, "Remember when you were scared of the dark? I still see the light go out." Another was a set of keys to my old apartment, a place I had moved from years before. The note that came with it said, "Every door is a memory." The frequency of the gifts increased, and with each delivery, the notes grew more unsettling. They started to include intimate details about my life, private conversations I'd had with friends, personal fears and dreams. The sender seemed to know everything about me, from my childhood insecurities to my most recent accomplishments. One afternoon, as I was sorting through yet another package, I found a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside was a collection of items that took my breath away: a lock of hair from my high school prom, a ring I had lost during a vacation, and a small piece of paper with a cryptic message, "I've been with you through it all." The deeper I delved into the mystery of the gifts, the more disturbed I became. I tried to trace the origins of the packages, but found no clues. The postmarks were from different locations all over the country, and there were no identifiable fingerprints or return addresses. Each package arrived in perfect condition, as if someone had taken great care to ensure they reached me without a hitch. Desperation led me to confront my closest friends and family, hoping for any clue as to who might be behind this disturbing gesture. But no one had any idea. They were all as perplexed and worried as I was. It was clear that the sender knew far more about me than anyone I spoke to on a regular basis. The final package was the most unsettling. It arrived on a dreary, rainy evening I almost didn't open it. The dread gnawing at me inside. I found an old journal of mine, one that had gone missing years ago. The pages were filled with my most private thoughts, including details I had never shared with anyone. It was clear that the journal had been meticulously preserved, but what made my blood run cold was the final note, which was different from the others. It wasn't just a brief message. It was a long, rambling confession. The note described how the sender had been watching me for years, how they had kept track of every important moment in my life. They spoke of a twisted sense of duty to protect me, to ensure I was always watched over. Though their methods were far from comforting, I know you better than anyone. The note read, every memory, every moment, nothing escapes me. I've been with you through every joy and every sorrow. You are mine to watch over. The revelation that someone had been so intimately involved in my life without my knowledge was deeply disturbing. It was as if my entire existence had been observed and documented by a hidden presence, one that had an unsettling sense of control over my memories and experiences. Feeling a sense of urgency, I decided to take action. I contacted law enforcement, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered. The investigation into the anonymous center began, but the trail was cold. The packages had no identifying marks, and the center had covered their tracks well. As days turned into weeks, I found myself grappling with the anxiety and paranoia that the gifts had stirred in me. My home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage for an unseen observer. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, my every move feeling like it was being watched. The strange gifts eventually stopped arriving, but the fear and unease lingered. I changed my routines, altered my daily habits, and even considered moving to a new location. The anonymous sender had left an indelible mark on my life, and the unsettling knowledge that someone had been watching and collecting my personal moments left me with a constant nagging sense of vulnerability. The experience had transformed my perception of safety and privacy. I became more vigilant, more cautious about sharing details of my life. The gifts, though they had ceased, had unveiled a dark chapter of invasion and control that I couldn't easily forget. The anonymous sender had left an imprint on my life that would forever influence how I viewed trust and security. Story 64. The morning started like any other, with sunlight filtering through the curtains and the soft hum of my coffee maker in the background. But the sense of normalcy was shattered when I noticed a small package on my doorstep. It was a plain brown box with no return address, only my name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Curiosity mixed with unease. As I carried the box inside, I sliced through the tape with a knife and opened it. Inside, I found a stack of photographs, each one meticulously arranged and bound with a simple rubber band. My heart raced as I flipped through the photos, each one revealing a different scene from my life. The first photograph was taken at a local park where I had enjoyed a peaceful afternoon a week ago. I was seated on a bench reading a book. The photo was taken from a distance, capturing me in a candid moment. As I examined it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had not noticed anyone taking my picture that day, and the thought that someone had been watching me was deeply unsettling. The next few photos showed me at various locations around the city, walking out of the grocery store, having lunch at a cafe, and even visiting the library. Each image was taken from different angles and distances, but all featured the same unsettling detail. I was always alone, and there were no signs of anyone else in the frame. It was as if someone had been following me for weeks, documenting my every move. My unease grew as I reached the final photograph. It was different from the others. It showed me in my own living room, seated at the couch with a look of surprise on my face. The photo had been taken through the window, and it was clear that someone had been outside. Peering in, the scene was eerily accurate, capturing a moment when I had been reading a book and momentarily looked up, startled by a noise. The photograph was dated for the previous day, adding to the chilling realization that someone had been watching me just hours Before a note was tucked inside the package, I unfolded it, my hands trembling. The note read, "I see you and I know you see me. These photos are a reflection of your life captured and predicted. Watch closely, and you will find the future. Revealed, the choices you make will determine what comes next." My pulse quickened as I tried to make sense of the message. The photos seemed to suggest that someone was not only watching me, but also manipulating events in my life, the idea of my future being predicted in such a personal and intrusive manner was terrifying. Desperate for answers, I reached out to the police. I provided them with the package and the photos, hoping they could trace the sender or at least provide some guidance. The officers took the evidence and promised to investigate. They explained that the photos might be the work of someone with a personal vendetta or a stalker, but without additional evidence, it was difficult to determine the motive or identity of the sender. As days passed, the photos continued to haunt me. Each morning I would check my mailbox, half expecting another package to arrive. My daily routines became fraught with paranoia. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone was watching me. One afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found another envelope. It was similar in appearance to the previous package, but this time there was no box, just a single photograph. It was taken from the park where I had seen the first photo, and I was walking along a trail. But this time the photo was marked with a red X over a specific spot on the path. The message scrolled on the back read, "The path you choose will shape your destiny. Meet me where the X marks the spot, and you will understand." The note left me feeling both intrigued and terrified. The prospect of meeting this mysterious figure was daunting, but the sense of being manipulated into making a choice I didn't understand was even more unnerving. I decided to confront whatever awaited me, hoping it would provide some answers. That evening, as twilight settled over the park, I made my way to the marked location. The park was eerily quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and distant sounds of city life breaking the silence. I reached the spot marked by the red X, an area where the path curved and opened up to a small clearing. I waited, my nerves on edge, until I saw a figure approaching from the shadows. It was a man dressed in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. He stopped a few feet away from me, his posture rigid and commanding. "You've come," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "I see you've been following the clues. Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" The man stepped closer, and his face emerged from the shadows. He was older, with sharp features and an intense gaze. "I am someone who has been observing your life, seeing how you respond to the unknown. The photos were meant to reveal the patterns of your future and test your resolve." I felt a mix of anger and fear. Why are you doing this?" The man's expression soft, often slightly. "You see, our choices define who we are. The photos were not just predictions, but a way to guide you toward a realization. Your reactions, your decisions, they determine your path. I wanted you to see how the future can be shaped by the present." My mind raced, trying to piece together the meaning of his words. "So this was all just a test?" "Not just a test," he replied. "A lesson. You faced uncertainty and fear, but you've also demonstrated resilience. The future is yours to shape, and how you respond to challenges defines your destiny." With that, the man turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a long while, processing the encounter and the cryptic message he had left me. The photos, the predictions, and the test had all been a part of a larger game, a game designed to force me to fr my fears and choices. As I left the park, I felt a sense of closure and liberation. The ordeal had been unsettling, but it had also been a stark reminder of the power of choice and the importance of confronting the unknown with courage. The future remained uncertain, but I now understood that I had the power to shape it through my actions and decisions. Story 65. It began on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the leaves crunch underfoot in the twilight. Sky seems to embrace the neighborhood in a warm golden glow. I was In the backyard with my children setting up for a small family gathering, the laughter of my kids mingled with the rustling leaves, creating a peaceful soundtrack to the evening. As I was arranging the picnic table, I noticed something strange, or small hovering object in the sky. At first I thought it was a bird or a distant plane, but as it moved closer and hovered directly above our yard, I realized it was a drone. Its presence was unsettling. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might be part of some neighborhood event or a new tech-savvy hobbyist. Over the next few days, the drones became a frequent and unwelcome presence. They appeared at odd hours, sometimes in the early morning or late at night, and seemed to have an uncanny ability to hover precisely over our house, capturing every moment of our daily life. It wasn't just one drone, but a few, always operating in a coordinated manner. Their persistence grew more intrusive, and I began to feel like I was living under constant surveillance. Worried and disturbed, I decided to take action. I installed security cameras around the house to document their activity and started making notes of their flight patterns. My anxiety only deepened as I realized the drones were capturing footage of intimate family moments, playdates with my children, quiet dinners with my husband, and even mundane activities like gardening. I confronted the situation by reaching out to local authorities. An officer came to inspect the footage and assured me that they would look into the matter. However, the response was tepid, with no immediate resolution. They explained that drones were often difficult to trace due to their small size and the fact that they could be operated from a significant distance away. The real breakthrough came when I decided to investigate further on my own. I analyzed the footage from my security cameras and noticed something peculiar. The drones followed a precise route, always appearing at the same angles, almost as if they were being controlled by someone with a methodical